The girl crawled from the burning house on hands and knees, her nightgown singed black at the edges. Smoke filled her lungs. The flames behind her reached toward stars that offered no comfort. Broken Arrow watched from the ridge. His horse shifted. Beneath him, sensing the wrongness in the air. Fire meant different things to different people. To his people, it cleansed. To the whites, it usually meant someone had something to hide. The girl collapsed in the tall grass 20 yards from the house. Her chest rose and fell in desperate pulls for clean air. Dark hair fell across her face. She couldn't be more than 15. He should ride on. His business lay elsewhere tonight. But something held him, the way she'd crawled. The way the fire burned too evenly. The way riders approached from the east with torches held high. The girl lifted her head. Even from this distance, he could see her eyes reflecting the flames. Wild, desperate, alive, they tried to kill me. Her voice carried on the wind. Broken Arrow nudged his horse closer. My husband's brothers. They lit the fire. The riders drew near. 2 men on horseback, their faces hard in the torchlight. They studied the burning structure with the satisfaction of men whose plans had succeeded. The taller one dismounted and walked the perimeter. Looking for her, Broken Arrow had choices. Ride away and let frontier justice sort itself. Stay and witness whatever came next. Or act. His sister Dawn Sky had burned too. Different fire. Same kind of men. He guided his horse down the slope. The girl heard him coming. Fear replaced the wildness in her eyes. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. Don't. Her voice cracked. Please. He stopped his horse beside her. Extended his hand. The riders had found something in the grass. They were pointing, talking, moving closer. You want to live or die here? She stared at his face. His clothes. The way he sat his horse. Understanding dawned slowly. He was Comanche. She was white. This was Texas. Nothing about this made sense, but the riders were getting closer. She took his hand. He pulled her up behind him. Her arms circled his waist. She weighed nothing. The horse barely noticed the extra burden. They rode into darkness as the men with torches reached the spot where she'd fallen. Shouts followed them into the hills, then silence. Then the sound of hooves on stone and nothing else. The girl shivered against his back, shock setting in. The night air cut through her thin nightgown. He should find her shelter, food, but first he needed answers. What's your name? Delilah. The word came out broken. Delilah Ashford. He'd heard the name. Different context. You're Thomas Pritchard's widow. She stiffened. You knew my husband? Knew of him. Broken Arrow guided the horse along a narrow deer trail. Away from the main roads. Away from pursuit. Heard he died in a riding accident. That's what they said. Her voice turned bitter. That's the lie they told. The trail wound higher into the hills. Scrub oak and cedar provided cover. A good place to stop and sort through what had happened. What it meant. What came next. He found a small clearing protected by rock outcroppings. Dismounted and helped her down. She sat heavily on a fallen log. Exhaustion replacing adrenaline. You said your husband's brothers lit the fire. She nodded. Silas and Mordecai. They thought I was asleep inside. Why would they want you dead? Thomas left me everything. The ranch, the water rights, the cattle. She wrapped her arms around herself. They expected to inherit it all. Broken Arrow studied her face in the moonlight. Young, pretty, scared, but something else. Anger, the kind that burns steady and long. You have proof? I heard them talking, planning it. She reached into her nightgown and pulled out a leather-bound book. Singed at the edges but intact. I grabbed this when I smelled the smoke. He took the book. Opened it. Pages of careful handwriting. Numbers, names, dates. A record of something. Thomas kept accounts of everything. she said. Every business deal, every payment, every person he didn't trust. Broken Arrow flipped through the pages. Much of it made no sense to him, but some names he recognized, including his own tribe's name and payments marked beside it. Your husband did business with the Comanche? Thomas said the Pritchards were stealing from everyone. White, Indian, didn't matter. Her voice strengthened. He was trying to stop them. That explained some things. Thomas Pritchard's death hadn't been random. It had been necessary for someone. What else do you know? They hired men to raid settlements, make it look like Indian attacks. She met his eyes. They wanted people scared, angry, ready to sell their land cheap. The fire that killed Dawn Sky, the others. His people blamed, hunted, driven from their homes. You're saying they killed my sister? Delilah went very still. Your sister? Dawn Sky. Burned with her family 2 months ago. Everyone said it was revenge for some cattle raid that never happened. Understanding passed between them. Different losses. Same enemy. I'm sorry. The words carried weight. Thomas tried to stop them. That's why they killed him too. Broken Arrow closed the book, handed it back to her. This proves what you're saying. Some of it. But it's written in code. Thomas was careful. She tucked the book back inside her nightgown. I know some of it, not all. The wind picked up, carried the smell of smoke from the valley below. Her house would be ash by morning, her old life erased. What will you do now? She stood up, steadier now. Find a way to prove they murdered Thomas. Make them pay for what they've done. They'll be hunting you, every lawman, every bounty hunter. They'll say you killed your husband, burned your own house, stole whatever. Money they claim is missing. I know. You'll be running the rest of your life. Maybe. She looked back toward the valley, toward the dying fire. But I won't be running alone. He understood. She was asking, not begging. Asking for partnership. Why would I help you? Because they killed your sister. Because they're still killing people. Because if we don't stop them, no one will. The horse stamped its feet, eager to move, to find water and rest. The night was half gone. By morning, the hunt would begin. In earnest. Broken Arrow had been tracking the Pritchards for weeks, looking for proof, looking for justice, looking for the right moment to act. Maybe the moment had found him instead. We'll need supplies, weapons, a safe place to study that. Book. Relief flooded her face. You'll help me? I'll help us both. He helped her back onto the horse. They rode deeper into the hills as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. Behind them, smoke still rose from the ashes of her old life. Ahead lay something neither of them could yet imagine. The wanted posters appeared like vultures after carrion. Every trading post, every saloon, every church door between here and the Rio Grande. Delilah Ashford Pritchard. Wanted for the murder of her husband Thomas Pritchard. Reward, $500, dead or alive. Iron Jake Carver, read the poster outside. Miller's General Store. His fingers traced the crude sketch of a young woman's face. 500 was good money, more than good. It was enough to buy a man a new life somewhere else. The description underneath told a story Carver recognized. Young widow, grief-stricken, probably armed and definitely dangerous. The kind of desperate that made people do stupid things. He folded the poster and tucked it inside his coat. Asked around town about the girl, about her habits, about where she might run. Most folks remembered her as quiet, well-mannered, the kind of girl who said please and thank you and never caused trouble, which made the murder charge harder to believe and easier to sell. The quiet ones always surprised people. Carver mounted his horse and rode toward the burned remains of the Pritchard homestead. Crime scenes told stories if you knew how to read them. This one would tell him which direction grief and desperation had chosen to travel. In the hills above the valley, Broken Arrow watched the bounty hunter work. The man moved methodically around the burned foundation, studying the ground, following tracks that led nowhere useful. Delilah crouched beside him behind a screen of cedar and stone. She'd learned to move quietly in the 3 days since the fire, learned to sleep on hard ground, learned that survival meant shedding everything soft about herself. "He's good," Broken Arrow said. The bounty hunter had found where they'd stopped that first night, had followed their trail almost to the ridge before losing it in the rocky ground. Most men would have given up. This one kept looking. How long before he finds us? Depends how patient he is. How much he wants that money. They watched Carver mount his horse and ride toward town, probably to gather more information. Ask more questions. Build a better picture of who Delilah had been before she became a wanted woman. Broken Arrow rose from his crouch. "We need to move." They'd been using an old line shack deep in Comanche territory, abandoned by ranchers who'd learned that some ground wasn't worth the fighting it took to hold it. The cabin sat in a box canyon with water and good sight lines. Safe enough for now. Delilah had spent the morning trying to decode Thomas's ledger. The entries were careful, methodical, but written in a cipher that required something she didn't have. "It's his ring," she said as they rode toward the cabin. Thomas always wore his signet ring. He'd press it into sealing wax whenever he made important agreements. "Where's the ring now?" "Buried with him." Broken Arrow understood immediately. The graveyard sat in the center of town, surrounded by houses, watched by people who knew Delilah's face. Getting to Thomas's grave meant walking into the heart of enemy territory. There might be another way. She shook her head. Thomas was careful about everything. The ring was part of his system. Without it, this book is just numbers and names that don't prove anything. At the cabin, she showed him pages of the ledger, columns of figures, dates, initials that might belong to anyone. Nothing that would convince a judge or jury. But Broken Arrow saw patterns she'd missed. Payments that coincided with raids on his people. Amounts that matched stolen cattle and missing horses. Dates that lined up with burnings and killings blamed. On Comanche war parties, your husband documented everything. He said the truth would matter someday. That someone would need proof. She closed the book. "I just never thought that someone would be me." The afternoon brought news from town. Broken Arrow's contacts among the Mexican traders reported bounty hunters arriving daily. Men drawn by the reward money and the promise of easy work. How hard could it be to find one frightened girl? But they were looking for a victim, someone running scared and making mistakes. They weren't looking for a partnership. For someone learning to think and move and survive. "Tell me about Dawn Sky," Delilah said that evening. They sat beside a small fire in the cabin's stone fireplace. The flames cast shadows on walls marked by years of weather and neglect. Outside, wind moved through the canyon with sounds that could have been voices or could have been nothing at all. "She was my younger sister, married to a good man. They had a daughter." Broken Arrow stared into the fire. "The raiders came at night, burned their lodge, made it look like a settlement dispute. How do you know it was the Pritchards? One of the raiders got careless, left behind a button from a cavalry coat, but no cavalry had been through that area in months." He looked at her. "Your husband's ledger shows payments to men who called themselves scouts, but they weren't scouting for the army." Understanding settled between them. Different families, different losses. Same enemy. "We can't bring them back." "No, but we can stop it from happening again." The fire burned lower. Outside, night sounds filled the canyon. Coyotes calling to each other across the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of horses moving fast. Broken Arrow rose and moved to the window. Listened. The horses were Still far away but getting closer, moving with purpose. Put out the fire. Delilah scattered the burning logs with a poker. Darkness filled the cabin. They crouched beside the window and waited. 3 riders approached the canyon mouth. They moved carefully, studying the ground even in the poor light. Professional, methodical, led by a man who sat his horse with the confidence of someone who'd done this work many times before. Iron Jake Carver had found their trail after all. The riders paused at the canyon entrance, talking quietly among themselves, deciding whether to approach in darkness or wait for dawn, whether to try negotiation or simply end things quickly. Carver made the choice for them. He spurred his horse forward. His men followed. They rode toward the cabin with weapons drawn but not aimed, ready for trouble but hoping to avoid it. Delilah Pritchard, Carver called out when they were 50 yards away. "I know you're in there. Come out and we'll talk." Silence from the cabin. "You're not a killer, girl. Everyone in town says so. Whatever happened with your husband, we can sort it out proper. With a judge and jury and all the legal fixings." More silence. "The alternative is we come in and get you. That won't go as easy for anyone." Broken Arrow touched Delilah's shoulder, pointed toward the back of the cabin, a window that opened onto the narrow space between the building and the canyon wall. Room enough for 2 people to slip away if they moved quietly. She nodded, gathered the ledger and what few supplies they could carry silently, followed him toward the window. "I'm losing patience out here," Carver called. They dropped through the window into the gap behind the cabin, pressed themselves against the stone wall, and moved toward the back of the canyon, toward a trail that would take them up and out of the box they'd trapped themselves in. Behind them, they heard Carver's patience finally break. Boots on the cabin porch, the door kicked open. Shouts of anger and frustration when the searchers found nothing but cold ashes and abandoned supplies. By the time the bounty hunters thought to check the back of the canyon, Broken Arrow and Delilah were already climbing toward the rim, moving through darkness that had become their ally instead of their enemy. At the top of the canyon, they paused to catch their breath. Below, torches moved through the cabin, men looking for clues about where their quarry had gone. "He's better than I thought," Broken Arrow said. "Will he follow us?" "He'll try, but we know this country now. He's still learning it." They walked through the night toward a new hiding place, toward time to plan their next move. The ledger pressed against Delilah's chest where she'd hidden it inside her shirt. Still encrypted, still useless without Thomas's ring, which meant they had to go back, had to risk everything on one chance to get the evidence they needed. The graveyard waited in the center of town. Thomas's grave waited in the center of the graveyard, and Iron Jake Carver waited somewhere between here and there. Dawn found them on a ridge overlooking the valley. The town spread below them, peaceful, ordinary, full of people who believed what they'd been told about the young widow who'd murdered her husband and fled into the wilderness. Getting to that grave would require more than courage. It would require becoming someone else entirely, someone the bounty hunters weren't looking for. Delilah studied the town through the morning light. Somewhere down there, Silas and Mordecai Pritchard were planning their next move, deciding how to eliminate the last threat to their empire. They thought she was running scared, thought desperation would make her careless. They were about to learn otherwise. The preacher's wagon rolled into town on Sunday morning. Dust kicked up by the wheels settled on everything: buildings, people, hope itself. Delilah sat beside the Mexican trader who'd agreed to the deception. Her dress was plain cotton, her hair braided and pinned beneath a simple bonnet. She kept her eyes down and her hands folded, the picture of modest devotion. Nobody looked twice at a preacher's daughter. The wagon stopped outside the church. People gathered to hear news from other settlements, other congregations. other places where God's word still mattered in a hard land. Delilah climbed down carefully, slowly, let herself be seen as harmless, forgettable, just another young woman whose father spent his life carrying salvation to places that needed it most. The cemetery lay behind the church. Neat rows of wooden crosses and stone markers, some fresh, some weathered gray by wind and time. Thomas's grave sat in the newer section, the earth still dark above where he'd been laid to rest 3 months ago. She walked among the graves while the townspeople listened to the traders' stories, pretended to read inscriptions, mourned strangers while moving closer to the one person she'd actually loved. Thomas Pritchard, beloved husband, taken too soon. The words carved into the wooden cross told lies as much as truth. Beloved by her, maybe, but taken by his own brothers. Murdered for money and land and the simple greed that drove men to become monsters. She knelt beside the grave, bowed her head, looked every inch the pious young woman paying respects to the dead. But her fingers worked at the loose earth around the cross. Not digging, just testing. Feeling how deep the ground stayed soft. How much work it would take to reach what lay beneath. Too much work for daylight. Too much risk with people around. She rose and walked back toward town. The trader had finished his stories. People were drifting toward their homes, their Sunday dinners, their afternoon rest. Nobody paid attention to the preacher's daughter who'd spent a few minutes honoring the dead. Night would tell a different story. Broken Arrow waited in the abandoned livery at the edge of town. The building had been empty since its owner died of fever the previous winter. Nobody came here anymore. Nobody had reason to. He'd spent the day watching, learning patterns, counting how many men Carver had brought to town, where they posted themselves, how they moved through the streets. Professional work, thorough, but focused on the wrong things. They were watching for a desperate girl fleeing on horseback, not a mourning widow walking calmly through a cemetery. Delilah found him after dark, changed back into traveling clothes, ready for what came next. 3 guards, Broken Arrow said. 1 at the sheriff's office, 1 at the hotel, 1 walking circuits around the main street. What about the cemetery? Nothing regular, but it's open ground. Anyone watching from the church or the houses around it would see us working. They had tools, a small shovel, a pry bar, cloth to muffle the sound of digging. But stealth only worked if nobody was looking in the right direction. How long to reach the coffin? Hour, maybe 2 if the ground's harder than it looks. 2. Long, too exposed, too much chance of discovery. But the ledger was useless without Thomas's ring. And the ring lay 6 feet below ground in a wooden box beside a dead man's finger. There's another way, Delilah said. She'd been thinking about it all day. About Thomas and his careful nature. About the habits that had kept him alive until his brothers finally decided he'd lived too long. He never wore the ring to bed. Always put it on his nightstand. She looked toward the center of town, toward the house where Silas Pritchard now lived, where Thomas had lived before his death. If they buried him wearing it, someone had to put it on his finger. You think it's still in the house? I think Silas is too greedy to bury $500 worth of gold. The Pritchard house sat on Main Street, 2 stories, white painted wood, black shutters, the kind of respectable appearance that money could buy but couldn't earn. Lights burned in the downstairs windows. Silas entertaining guests, probably other ranchers, possibly the sheriff. Men who mattered in a town where mattering meant having enough money to make other people afraid. The upstairs was dark. Bedrooms, private spaces. Places where a grieving brother might keep his dead siblings' personal effects. They approached from behind, through the alley that ran between the house and the bank, past the kitchen garden where herbs grew in neat rows. up to the back porch where deliveries were made and servants entered. The kitchen door was locked. But locks were made by men for other men. They weren't made to stop someone with broken arrow skills and Delilah's knowledge of the house layout. Inside, voices drifted from the front parlor. Men talking business, cattle prices, water rights. The kind of conversation that happened every night in houses throughout the territory. Delilah led the way upstairs. She knew which steps creaked, which doors opened quietly, which rooms had been Thomas's and which belonged to his brothers. The master bedroom had been changed since Thomas's death. New curtains, different furniture arrangement. Silas had erased his brother's presence and replaced it with his own. But some things remained. A dresser that had belonged to their father. A mirror that reflected 3 generations of Pritchard men. A small wooden box on the knitstand where Thomas had kept his personal items. Delilah opened the box carefully. Inside lay a pocket watch, a few coins, a photograph of her taken on their wedding day, and beneath it all, wrapped in soft cloth, Thomas's signet ring. She held it up to the window. Moonlight caught the gold, revealed the family crest carved into its surface, the same crest that marked important pages in Thomas's ledger. Voices from downstairs grew louder. Someone was coming upstairs. Heavy footsteps on the staircase. A man walking with the confidence of someone in his own home. Silas, probably. Coming to bed or fetch something from his room. Delilah pocketed the ring. They moved toward the window that faced the back of the house. The same window Thomas had looked through every morning when he'd been alive to see mornings. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. A door opened. Light spilled into the hallway. But it wasn't the master bedroom door. It was the door to Thomas's old study, the room where he'd kept his books, his maps, his records of everything that mattered to him. Silas was looking for something. The same something they'd come to find. They waited in the darkness of the bedroom, listened to drawers being opened, papers shuffled, the sound of frustration growing as the search continued. Finally, the study door closed. Footsteps moved back downstairs. Silas returning to his guests with whatever he'd been seeking or the knowledge that it wasn't where he'd expected to find it. They climbed through the bedroom window onto the back porch roof, dropped silently into the kitchen garden, made their way back through the alley toward the abandoned livery. But something had changed while they were inside. The town felt different, more alert, more dangerous. A figure stepped out of the shadows beside the bank building. Iron Jake Carver, gun drawn but not aimed. Professional courtesy between hunters. Delilah Pritchard. She stopped walking. Broken arrow melted sideways into darkness that swallowed him completely. Carver noticed but didn't seem concerned. His attention stayed focused on her. You're a hard woman to find. I'm not hiding. No, you're hunting. He studied her face in the moonlight. Question is what you're hunting for. She could run, could scream, could do any number of things that would end badly for everyone involved. Instead, she reached into her pocket, pulled out Thomas's ring. Let Carver see what she'd risked everything to obtain. Evidence. Evidence of what? That I didn't kill my husband. That his brothers did. That they're going to keep killing until someone stops them. Carver looked at the ring, at her face, at the determination that had replaced the fear he'd expected to find. You got proof of that. I will, once I decode Thomas's records. And then what? Then I take it to the law, Carver laughed. Not cruel, just tired. The laugh of a man who'd seen too much of the world to believe in simple solutions. The law's bought and paid for, girl. Sheriff Hawkins has been on the Pritchard payroll since before your husband died. He holstered his gun. Matter of fact, so. Have one. The words hit her harder than any physical blow. The bounty, the hunt, the careful pursuit that had driven them from hiding place to hiding place. All of it orchestrated by the same men who'd lit the fire that should have killed her. They hired you to bring me back. They hired me to make sure you never make it to trial. Carver stepped closer. Dead or alive, the poster said. But we both know which one they're hoping for. Behind him, Broken Arrow emerged from the shadows, silent as death. Close enough to end things quickly. But Carver raised his hands, showed empty palms. Lucky for you, I don't much like being lied to, and I like murdering innocent girls even less. He turned around slowly, faced Broken Arrow without fear or aggression. This is where you decide who dies tonight, and who walks away with a chance to see justice done proper. The three of them stood in the alley behind the bank, between the respectable front of the town and the darkness that hid its true nature. Somewhere in that darkness lay the truth they'd been seeking, and the choice that would define what came next. Devil's Canyon held secrets in its shadows, the kind of place where desperate people went to disappear forever, where the wind carried away screams and buried bones beneath shifting sand. Delilah. Ashford lay crumpled at the bottom of the ravine, her dress torn, her face pale in the afternoon sun. Blood stained the rocks where her head had struck during the fall. Above her, Broken Arrow's body sprawled motionless beside an overturned horse. Buzzards circled overhead, patient, knowing. Iron Jake Carver studied the scene through his spyglass. Perfect, tragic, exactly what it needed to be. Shame about the girl, he said to his men, trying to escape on a horse too wild for her. These canyon trails are dangerous for folks who don't know them. The other bounty hunters nodded. They'd collect their fee, file their report, move on to the next job, clean and simple. Except for the details that didn't fit. The way the blood had dried too quickly, the angle of the bodies, the complete absence of horse tracks leading to the canyon rim. Carver noticed, because noticing kept him alive. But he kept his observations to himself. Some truths were worth more than others. 2 days later, the funeral drew half the county. Mourners came to honor the tragic young widow who'd lost her mind to grief, who'd fled into the wilderness with a savage and paid the ultimate price for her poor judgment. Silas Pritchard delivered a eulogy, spoke of forgiveness, of the mercy God showed to souls led astray by desperation and fear. His words carried the weight of genuine sorrow and manufactured relief. Mordecai stood beside the grave with his hat in his hands, the picture of grieving family. Inside, he counted the acres that would never be contested again, the water rights that belonged to them now, the future that stretched ahead without complications. Sheriff Wade Hawkins provided official closure. Death by misadventure. Case closed. Justice served in its own rough way. But in the crowd of mourners, other faces watched with different eyes. Captain Marcus Webb of the Territorial Cavalry stood at the back, listening, learning, filing away details that would matter later. The investigation had brought him to this town. Reports of raids blamed on Indians, settlers killed and property stolen. A pattern of violence that didn't match any known tribal activity. The girl's death felt convenient. Too convenient for a man who'd spent 20 years sorting truth from lies on the frontier. That night, Webb found an envelope slipped under his hotel room door. No signature, no explanation. Just a collection of papers that told a story the funeral hadn't mentioned. Thomas Pritchard's decoded ledger, pages of careful documentation. Payments to raiders, stolen goods. Coordinated attacks, designed to look random. A criminal enterprise that used racial hatred as camouflage for simple greed. And recordings, conversations captured on wax cylinders. Voices discussing murder, planning violence, dividing stolen land among themselves. Silas Pritchard's voice, clear and unmistakable, confessing to crimes that went back years, that had killed dozens of people, that would continue killing unless someone stopped them, Webb studied the evidence through the night, cross-referenced dates with official reports, matched payments with unexplained wealth, built a case that would hold up in territorial court. At dawn, he sent telegrams to the territorial marshal, to the army, to men who cared more about justice than local politics. The arrests came at noon. Federal marshals surrounded the Pritchard ranch, found Silas in his study, Mordecai in the barn, Sheriff Hawkins at his desk, desperately burning papers that wouldn't burn fast enough. No resistance, no dramatic confrontation. Just the quiet efficiency of law applied properly. Finally, Carver watched from the hotel porch. Sipped. Have one. The words hit her harder than any physical blow. The bounty, the hunt, the careful pursuit that had driven them from hiding place to hiding place. All of it orchestrated by the same men who'd lit the fire that should have killed her. They hired you to bring me back. They hired me to make sure you never make it to trial. Carver stepped closer. Dead or alive, the poster said. But we both know which one they're hoping for. Behind him, Broken Arrow emerged from the shadows, silent as death. Close enough to end things quickly. But Carver raised his hands, showed empty palms. Lucky for you, I don't much like being lied to, and I like murdering innocent girls even less. He turned around slowly, faced Broken Arrow without fear or aggression. This is where you decide who dies tonight, and who walks away with a chance to see justice done proper. The three of them stood in the alley behind the bank, between the respectable front of the town and the darkness that hid its true nature. Somewhere in that darkness lay the truth they'd been seeking, and the choice that would define what came next. Devil's Canyon held secrets in its shadows, the kind of place where desperate people went to disappear forever, where the wind carried away screams and buried bones beneath shifting sand. Delilah. Ashford lay crumpled at the bottom of the ravine, her dress torn, her face pale in the afternoon sun. Blood stained the rocks where her head had struck during the fall. Above her, Broken Arrow's body sprawled motionless beside an overturned horse. Buzzards circled overhead, patient, knowing. Iron Jake Carver studied the scene through his spyglass. Perfect, tragic, exactly what it needed to be. Shame about the girl, he said to his men, trying to escape on a horse too wild for her. These canyon trails are dangerous for folks who don't know them. The other bounty hunters nodded. They'd collect their fee, file their report, move on to the next job, clean and simple. Except for the details that didn't fit. The way the blood had dried too quickly, the angle of the bodies, the complete absence of horse tracks leading to the canyon rim. Carver noticed, because noticing kept him alive. But he kept his observations to himself. Some truths were worth more than others. 2 days later, the funeral drew half the county. Mourners came to honor the tragic young widow who'd lost her mind to grief, who'd fled into the wilderness with a savage and paid the ultimate price for her poor judgment. Silas Pritchard delivered a eulogy, spoke of forgiveness, of the mercy God showed to souls led astray by desperation and fear. His words carried the weight of genuine sorrow and manufactured relief. Mordecai stood beside the grave with his hat in his hands, the picture of grieving family. Inside, he counted the acres that would never be contested again, the water rights that belonged to them now, the future that stretched ahead without complications. Sheriff Wade Hawkins provided official closure. Death by misadventure. Case closed. Justice served in its own rough way. But in the crowd of mourners, other faces watched with different eyes. Captain Marcus Webb of the Territorial Cavalry stood at the back, listening, learning, filing away details that would matter later. The investigation had brought him to this town. Reports of raids blamed on Indians, settlers killed and property stolen. A pattern of violence that didn't match any known tribal activity. The girl's death felt convenient. Too convenient for a man who'd spent 20 years sorting truth from lies on the frontier. That night, Webb found an envelope slipped under his hotel room door. No signature, no explanation. Just a collection of papers that told a story the funeral hadn't mentioned. Thomas Pritchard's decoded ledger. Pages of careful documentation. Payments to raiders, stolen goods. Coordinated attacks. Designed to look random. A criminal enterprise that used racial hatred as camouflage for simple greed. And recordings, conversations captured on wax cylinders. Voices discussing murder, planning violence, dividing stolen land among themselves. Silas Pritchard's voice, clear and unmistakable, confessing to crimes that went back years, that had killed dozens of people, that would continue killing unless someone stopped them. Webb studied the evidence through the night, cross-referenced dates with official reports, matched payments with unexplained wealth, built a case that would hold up in territorial court. At dawn, he sent telegrams to the territorial marshal, to the army, to men who cared more about justice than local politics. The arrests came at noon. Federal marshals surrounded the Pritchard ranch, found Silas in his study, Mordecai in the barn, Sheriff Hawkins at his desk, desperately burning papers that wouldn't burn fast enough. No resistance, no dramatic confrontation. Just the quiet efficiency of law applied properly. Finally, Carver watched from the hotel porch, sipped,